notes, it's largely the thought that counts. No, I'm not just talking about thinking about taking notes, but rather taking notes about what you're thinking about. So when you're reading a bunch of papers, when you're shadowing someone learning a technique at the bench, it's really important that you take good notes and it's fine, it's good to take notes about like what you're thinking about what you're doing and your thought process, and it's going to really help you process information, remember it better, and be able to look back and better see like, oh yeah, that thing, I remember that, I was thinking that, that's why I thought that, and now you can draw all these connections. So I think that a big hurdle to people actually like getting things down on paper, which is the most important part, or on your type or your keyboard, is that you think that you need to make these like perfect notes, these grammatically perfect notes, and so it can seem really stressful. But really, it's just those jotted down the bullet points, all of these various things like what you were thinking, just kind of your thought process. I found that to be the most helpful. You can always clean them up later if you want, but really just kind of those little thoughts are the really, really crucial when you're looking back later. And of course, include those citations. And so I've talked about some various things about what to take notes on in the past, but today I want to focus more on just like your like actually taking the notes and some things to keep in mind when you do so. So probably one of the most important things is to avoid copy and pasting from articles that you're reading and taking notes on. Instead, like summarize and interpret them. So this is going to do a couple things. It's going to help you process the information because it's really easy to just copy and paste, right? And I mean, they did the work for you. But if you actually have to summarize it yourself, that's going to make you think about it and think about what's important, think about what they did, what they found, various things like that. And it's going to help you avoid like accidentally plagiarizing it in the future. But always when you're taking notes, make sure you include the citation with a hyperlink, so you can quickly return to the source, as well as the full citation somewhere, so you don't have to look them up if you want to use the paper in like a report or something. But always make sure that, so it's really important that you're like summarizing and interpreting the work, but that you're doing it correctly. And so like you're properly representing what they said and you have the facts right. So don't just change the wording so that you think you're not plagiarizing, but instead you really need to make sure that you are still keeping the factual correctness, but kind of you can put your own like phrasing and combining it with other topics and stuff. So, but you want to make sure that you're properly representing what they said. And so I've seen cases like that where somebody cite somebody, but they cite them and they've misunderstood what the original person was saying. So always make sure that you're like properly representing the work. And especially if you're taking notes on it when you're like new in the field and that sort of thing, like when you're starting out and you don't really have all the details, you might want to then go back later and kind of reread and see if there's anything that makes more sense, and now you kind of can click together and see, oh, that's what those people were talking about. And so, but you can only do that if you've taken notes in the first place. Okay, and then as I said, like your thoughts really do count. So write down your own personal thoughts and impression, and do this while they're fresh, so when you're reading the paper. And don't worry about being grammatically correct or grammatically perfect or anything like that. Bullet points are fine. These notes are for you. And so it's way more helpful to have some little like jotted down notes in a searchable format, preferably. So this is why I like typing up my notes after I like make some quick margin notes and that sort of thing on the paper, and then write up a more type up a version in my lab notebook and my electronic lab notebook, so that I can search for it later. But you really just want to put your thoughts down and stuff. And this makes it a lot less, this removes a bit of the barrier, like the activation energy, if we're going to go all biochemy, like think like enzymes, the activation energy that it takes to kind of get over that kind of initial, oh God, I have to write something down. I was reading this huge paper and now I have to actually I'm finally done with the paper and now I have to actually do something. But really it's just
quick notes are going to be so helpful, because later when you're reading like a bunch of papers and stuff, you're not going to remember those sort of things. And so just take little notes afterwards, and your future you will really, really thank you. And so you can also, I know I said don't copy and paste, but that's mostly for the text. So you can, a lot of times there are some great summary figures which say a lot more, like, figure speaks if that says 1,000 words or whatever. So these great summary figures can be really helpful too. But again, make sure that you're including those citations. And if you use one of those figures in a presentation, like a slideshow presentation or something, please, 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 please include a citation to the authors. And if you're using like a structure, include both the PDB code, so the code where they deposit the structure model in the database, as well as the like citation to the paper, so that you give the people credit for that. But don't just use someone's figure and not credit them. Okay, so yeah, but those can be really helpful in your notes too, as well as any thoughts that you had about the figure or that sort of thing. And remember too, if it's a figure where you need to have like the figure legend to understand what's going on, make sure you do that too. And then like there often, when there's figures and there's like certain things that are really most important, and so you can like highlight those in your notes, like little jot down things. This is why this is important, or this component I'm working here is blah blah blah. So how does this relate to what you're thinking about, what you're working on? Everybody's going to have different aspects of a scientific paper that they're going to be most drawn to, or that are going to jive more with their research, if that's applicable. So that was mostly for like reading papers, but there's also times you're going to be wanting to take notes in the lab. And so I've talked, I have a whole post about how to take notes when you're like lab notebook stuff. This is more just some notes about like if you're shadowing someone, like doing an experiment, learning to do an experiment from someone, that sort of thing. So often the first time when you're learning to do an experiment, it can be really stressful because you're like trying to like jot down all of these notes and pay close attention. And so what I recommend is that if like ask them, can I take pictures? And like, do you have like a protocol? Often they'll like you'll have some sort of printed out protocol, and then you can jot down notes on it, because there's always going to be like modifications and stuff. So you'll have this protocol, you might find a protocol online, and then when you go to actually do it with someone, they'll be like, oh yeah, we do this instead of that, or we do this instead, blah, blah. And then there'll be those little tiny things like, oh, make sure that you do this. You have to shake it a bit or it's not going to mix, all of these little notes. And so you want to jot down those notes while you're thinking about it. You can just add it to the little protocol. And so I was like shadowing some grad students yesterday who were helping teach me a technique, and they let me take pictures, which is great. And they also gave me a version of the protocol that they had written their notes on. So super duper helpful stuff like that. And again, you want to write this stuff down when it's fresh, because later you're not going to remember. And so then when you go to actually do the experiment, you'll be like, I know there was something that they said about something in this step. It was like, was it that, or was it that one, And so write these things down when they're fresh. And yeah, so those are just some basic things about kind of getting in the right mindset when you're taking notes. Remember, this should not be stressful. This should be the thing that's going to help you. And so remember that you're doing this for your future self.